Well, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, how can a fella that young have been preaching so long? It's that new math. God has been good to me. He has blessed me abundantly, and for that I am very, very thankful. And it's so good to see all of you. I have been blessed already today in meeting a number of old friends and former students, and rejoicing to see you here. And it's so good to be with you. There are no better people on earth. And God has blessed me to have friends and have fellowship with those who are indeed the best people on earth. So I am very thankful. We've had some happy times together. We've faced some opportunities and challenges together. There have been times that we've rejoiced in victory. There have been times that we've been saddened as we faced setbacks, hopefully temporary. But God has been so good to me that I'm thankful to be able to be with you today. I tried to retire back in August. I failed. And so we came with a plan where I'm semi-retired. Brother Greg Mangrum, one of the elders, asked me not too many months ago, he said, how does it feel to be semi-retired? I said, I can't tell any difference. But I'm thankful still to be here and working with the school. I commend the school. I think I know something about it. I came here as a student in '77, and then I've been teaching and working with the school since '94, so I think I know something about it, and I can commend it to you, worthy of your support and worthy of your coming as a student, that you might go forth and preach the gospel. So I encourage you to think about the Memphis School of Preaching. Pray for us. Help us as you can. We're looking at Proverbs 9 today. The one who chooses the house of wisdom over the house of folly. When we think about Proverbs, we're thinking about wise sayings. These are wise sayings that are weighty, they are powerful, and yet they are concise. They're really, in many cases, sentence sermons. There's a whole sermon right there in that one sentence. They very accurately and authoritatively address the various aspects of human life. If you want to be wise, if you want to have a good life, then read the book of Proverbs. As we look at Proverbs 9, it presents a contrast. And the contrast is between wisdom and folly. And here we have each personified as women. Wisdom is a woman. She has her house. She provides a feast. She sends out invitations. Likewise, folly is a woman. And she calls from her house to invite those who would pass by to come into her. And so the question really is, which invitation will we accept? And that will determine which life we have. You see, we have a choice. We can choose wisdom. We have that ability. Or we can choose folly. But as I try to tell to the students, and I do so quite often, choices have consequences. And so we need to know what will be the consequence of the choice that I make. When we look at Proverbs, again, these wise words indicate a broad knowledge. And the proper application of that is extremely important to the requirement that we would have and meet to have a good and godly life. Wise sayings. There is no part of human life that is not affected by our either having wisdom or lacking wisdom. And we see the world today and the shape in which it is, we wonder why, and here it is. The wise man will seek right relationships with God and with man. And he will do that based upon the true wisdom, following the ways of divine wisdom. The foolish man rejects that, of course, and men who do so grope blindly in the deep darkness of human wisdom, looking for answers that are not there. I remember Brother Garland Elkins and how we miss him. But I remember his saying, it's like a blind man looking for a black cat in a dark cellar, and there's no cat there. And so there are no answers. No answers from folly. But regrettably, the great majority of human beings will listen to Satan's lies and will choose that way of folly, foolishness, refuse the wisdom contained in God's book, and thus deny themselves all the benefits of that. Look at James 3:13 through 18, and James very succinctly addresses this undeniable difference between earthly wisdom and that wisdom that is from above. You'll notice the earthly wisdom is sensual and devilish, and there's strife and confusion and envying and every evil work associated with that. But the wisdom that is from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, easy to be entreated, full of mercy, good fruits, without partiality and without hypocrisy. And it brings about the fruit of righteousness. So there's a difference. And that difference between divine wisdom and man's folly is clear. It is distinct. It is discernible. We can see the difference. When you look at the book of Proverbs, the purpose of the book can be seen in verse 2 of chapter 1. The purpose of the book to show the importance of having knowledge, of receiving instruction, of gaining wisdom. And then you look at verse 7 of Proverbs 1, you'll see the key verse. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. Now, generally speaking, we would define wisdom as the ability to use knowledge, to use it correctly, to have skill in the use of it, to make proper application of what we know. And again, you look at the first part of Proverbs 1 through 7, and you'll see that the wise man will hear. He will listen. He will hear. He will increase learning. He'll be a man of understanding. He'll attain unto wise counsels. But, look at verse 7, fools despise wisdom and instruction. So wisdom calls us to hear and calls us to follow its instruction. You look at Proverbs 1:20 through 23, and you'll see again wisdom depicted as crying out, sending out the call, uttering her voice in the streets, crying in the chief place of concourse, in the gates, in the city. Look at verse 33. Whoso hearkens to wisdom shall dwell safely and shall be quiet from fear of evil. So there's a great and distinct difference. Proverbs 12:15 shows that God's Word declares the way of a fool is right in his own eyes. The way of a fool is right in his own eyes, but he that hearkeneth unto counsel is wise. So Proverbs is a book that was exactly suited for the time of its writing and for the time that followed and for time yet to come. There will never be a time when we look at Proverbs and say, well, that's outdated. That doesn't apply anymore. That's not going to be beneficial to us anymore. Those who ignore Proverbs will show themselves to be a fool. And they will not benefit, they'll remain a fool. But those who heed Proverbs will show themselves to be men of true wisdom. And nothing is ever going to change that truth. The wise man is the one who listens to God, the one who hears His instruction, the one who listens to God's wisdom and follows God's way. And you know that doesn't change regardless of what the media purports, regardless of what the politicians declare, regardless of what the professors set forth, regardless of what the philosophers say they have discovered, regardless of what governments might legislate and the masses foolishly follow, it is still true that the one who fails to apprise himself of God's wisdom and to follow it with great diligence and care is indeed a fool and will remain such. Let's look now at Proverbs 19. We'll start with verses 1 and 2. And as I pointed out, Proverbs depicts this marked contrast between wisdom and folly. You see that throughout the book. It's the contrast between the righteous and the sinner as you make the application of wisdom and folly. And it sets forth the blessings and the benefits of ethical, moral, godly behavior. Verses 1 and 2, we see wisdom's house. Wisdom hath builded her house. She hath hewn out her 7 pillars. She hath killed her beasts. She hath mingled her wine. She hath also furnished her table. And so we have depicted as a woman, a godly woman, wisdom. And notice what she does. She builds a house. And surely we ought to want to dwell in a house built by wisdom. We ought to want to know, how can we be there? How can we enjoy the blessings? How can we enter into this house that wisdom built? And so she built her house, and when people follow God's way, they will dwell safely therein. And she built this house upon 7 pillars that she hath hewn. You might say, well, what does that mean? When we think of the pillars or columns, they're the supports upon which the house will stand, and the firm foundation of the house will be built. And so she has these 7 pillars, but why 7? That often indicates perfection or completeness. And in verses like you find in Revelation 8, it indicates that this perfection is found in unity in God. And so 7 indicating perfection. 7 pillars, she built her house perfectly. It was perfect in the plan. It was perfect in the building of it. It was perfect in the completion of it. The house is just like it ought to be. And so all who passed by wisdom's house would admire it. It would certainly be impressive. So this is the house that wisdom built. Yet the great majority have and continue to this day to fall for Satan's lies and to reject God's wisdom. I know that there are probably many here today who could join with me in saying that we've had Bible studies with people and we knew that they saw it, they got it, they saw the truth and still rejected it. You wonder why? How foolish you are in rejecting the plain truth from God. And I know that you know it, and you still reject it. And so the great majority still reject God's plan. But here's what they do. They assure themselves all the while that even though they reject God's plan, they're going to suffer no loss. As a matter of fact, they're going to gain. They're not going to be the poorer for their decision, but the richer. They are going to, by this earthly wisdom, they're going to rise above the mundane and the simple. They're going to reach heights that you and I, who believe in God, they consider to be ignorant and superstitious. They're going to reach heights that they think we never can attain because we're not as smart as they are. But then one day, they will recognize they've sacrificed the abundant life that Jesus promised, John 10:10. They've sacrificed the eternal life that he promised, Matthew 25:46, for that foolish life. And it's going to be too late. God's Word shows wisdom's preparation for a great feast. And perhaps this would be as a celebration of finishing the house. She would invite others, and happy would be those who would accept her invitation. Notice she made ready by butchering animals in order that they might have an abundant meal for the guests. She busied herself in preparing mixed wine. That word wine, oftentimes confused as modern day people hear the word wine, they think of an intoxicating beverage, and it may be that, but it is not always that in the Bible. This word is from the Hebrew word yayin, and it can mean in a generic sense any aspect of the production, from the grape itself all the way to the juice, or even to that which is intoxicating, if that's the context. But it does not necessarily mean intoxicating. It's like John 2:9, and that which Jesus provided as he turned the water into wine. She laid out in order the table for her feast. That was the custom of the day. It's still the custom today, isn't it? As we think about inviting friends over, we're going to have a get-together, and we're going to have maybe all the family. And here's a special day. We're going to celebrate this day by getting everyone together. And so the host and the hostess will prepare for that getting together. They'll have a feast ready. The table is prepared. Everything is ready for the maximum benefit of the guests. Consider the expense. Consider the effort put forth by wisdom. And in doing so, wisdom has no thought of receiving, but she's giving. And so we ought to be impressed with that. She sent out the invitations. Look at verses 3 through 6. She sent forth her maiden. She cried upon the highest places of the city. Whoso is simple, let him turn in hither. As for him that wanteth understanding, she saith to him, Come, eat of my bread, and drink of the wine which I have mingled. Forsake the foolish, and live, and go in the way of understanding. And so she's getting out the invitations. She would send her maidens, the young female servants. It was customary to send out invitations well in advance of the feast, and then on the day of the feast to go out and cry out, go to the high places, cry out, remind everybody this is the day of the feast. And so she invited the simple, those needing understanding. The wisest men are those who understand they still have a lot to learn. She invited the simple to turn in hither, to come, to eat and to drink. And she admonished those invited to forsake the foolish. That can be a challenge at times. Forsake the foolish. Because we live in a world that is filled with foolish people. And if we forsake the foolish, we've got to say we're going to be different. We're not going the way of the majority. We don't approve of what the foolish are doing. We're going to do something over here that's different. And sometimes it's hard for us to do that. Forsake the foolish and live and go on the way of understanding. And when we think about this, we're reminded of the Savior's invitation. How oftentimes he would say, come in various situations. Matthew 11:28 through 30, come, take my yoke upon you, learn of me, you'll find rest. And so he invites us to come, and just like wisdom invites and promises blessing, so Jesus invites and promises blessing. And finally, Matthew 25:34, Come, ye blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. So we can come, and we must come if we'd have those blessings. But we have a choice to make. Notice verse 6, forsake the foolish and live. There's the difference. Forsake the foolish and live. Live the good life, the abundant life, that life that's a blessing. That life that will be a blessing to others. That life that will take us all the way to heaven. Forsake the foolish and live and go in the way of understanding. Verses 7 through 9, here's the one who is wise versus the one who is foolish. Notice that if you reprove a scorner, you get to yourself shame. Rebuke a wicked man, you get a blot. Reprove not a scorner, he'll hate you. And reprove a wise man, though he'll love you. Give instruction to a wise man, he will be yet wiser. Teach a just man, and he will increase in learning. And so the wise man, when rebuked properly, correctly, kindly, the wise man, when rebuked, will love you because he realizes your interest. He knows that you have his best interest at heart. You really care about him. When I was a younger man, and I obeyed the gospel of Christ, I came out of denominationalism. I basically was just a heathen. There were things that I didn't know. You know, when you go into that water of the baptistry, you don't learn everything there is to know while you're in there. And then come up and say, yeah, I got it. So there were things that I thought were okay that were not. And there were things that I didn't know that I should be doing that I should have. But you know, there were good, godly men who put their arm around my shoulder and took me to the side, and they said, have you thought about so-and-so? And I knew what they were saying. Have you thought about this? Let's look at this passage together. And they taught me the better way. And I knew they cared about me, and I really appreciated it because I wanted to do what was right. And so here's someone who corrects me. They do it in the right way, and I love them for it. When one is wise and he receives instruction, he will be yet wiser because he listens and he profits. So how do you improve? By learning. How do you learn? By heeding teaching. And what will that help you to be? A just man, a righteous man. Your desire is to be righteous. And if somebody can show you where you need to make correction, then you'll do that gladly, and you'll be thankful, and you'll love that one who corrects you. But the foolish man, when he's reproved, he's going to hate you. Anger, hatred, wrath will be how he replies. To try to bring that foolish man to a better understanding is a challenge indeed. And no doubt many of us today know by experience, as we have tried to help someone, and that's all we're trying to do, try to help somebody to know the way of truth, to live a better life, and then to be attacked with vicious hatred. Jesus said, give not that which is holy unto the dogs, neither cast ye your pearls before the swine, lest they trample them under their feet, and turn again and rend you, Matthew 7:6. You know, Paul was a man who went about trying to do all the good he could do. I'm convinced of that. He lived a good, godly life. He tried to help everybody he could. He stood for the truth. He fought for the faith. He suffered much. And all he was trying to do was to help people to turn from sin and to know salvation in Christ. But here's a sad verse that he wrote, Galatians 4:16. He said, am I therefore become your enemy because I tell you the truth? With a foolish man, that may be the result. Here's the problem. Concisely stated, wise men fear the Lord, and foolish men do not. Look at verse 10. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Now 1:7 tells us it's the beginning of knowledge. Those are two different words. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. The knowledge of the holy, that is, of the Holy One, is understanding. That fear is reverential respect. It's combined with the dread of God's disapproval. Hebrews 12, 28 and 29. Let him serve him with reverence and godly fear. And so it drives men to praise God, to please him, because we fear him. Faith, then, based upon knowledge and combined with that rightful awe, that respect, that godly fear, leads us to greater wisdom. You look at Ecclesiastes 12, 13 and 14. And I think about this quite often. Here was a man we would say had everything, tried everything, knew all the pleasures, and yet they did not fulfill. They were vanity. And he comes down to the conclusion. And what does he say? Here it is. What is it? Fear God and keep his commandments. This is the whole of man. The wise man does that. The knowledge of the Holy One is understanding, but the fool continues to be a fool because he does not fear God. He does not want to follow God. He mocks those who do. It's easy for ungodly people today to mock the righteous. They can just get on their social media. They can tear up stumps on there, can't they? You know what? I had a group of those folks come after me. I was preaching at Middleton, Tennessee, on the role of godly women as wife and mother. Oh, my word. They went crazy. They accused me of everything you can imagine. And my greatest sin was I was a white man with a beard. I don't know what that had to do with anything. But you know how much sleep I lost over that? Not 1 minute. I don't care what those people have to say. I went on and preached what I planned to preach. I may have added a little extra to it, but I'm not worried about what sinners say. I'm trying to please the Lord. Look at verses 11 and 12. For by me thy days shall be multiplied, and the years of thy life shall be increased. If thou be wise, thou shalt be wise for thyself. But if thou scornest, thou alone shalt bear it. Here's a general statement. It is an observable truth that those who are wise live better. They live happier. They live longer. And we all know that to be the case from our own observation. But God has promised a better life. John 10:10, again, abundant life. Ephesians 6:2 and 3, those who as children obey their parents, they are promised that they're going to have a prolonged life. That's a general promise. Sometimes people leave life too early. But you know what? They still have the promise of eternal life. They just get there a little before we do. Mark 10:29 and 30, Jesus promised that those who were to follow him, those who lived righteously, the wise, would receive in this life 100-fold, and in the world to come eternal life. It's the best life anybody ever could live. Now, if we had to suffer every day, all day long to live the Christian life, it would still be the best life. And look at what you have at the end. So wisdom truly blesses the wise, and folly truly robs the foolish. Notice verse 12. If thou scornest, thou alone shalt bear it. The scorner's scorn comes back on him as a condemning curse. But here's the saddest part of that. It doesn't have to be that way. He could have avoided that. He could have turned from folly to wisdom, from Satan to God. But by rejecting wisdom's invitation to the great feast, he has nobody to blame but himself. And look at the awful price that he has to pay. Verses 13 through 17, folly now is depicted as a woman. Notice she is clamorous loud, noisy, boisterous. She sits in the doorway of her house in the high places, and so she can be above the crowds. And she cries out so she can be seen and heard, and the unsuspecting passers-by hear that cry, and too many of them stop and listen. Psalm 1 tells us that the man who is blessed is the man who doesn't walk in the way of the ungodly, or stand in the way of sinners, or sitteth in the seat of the scornful. The woman folly calls the foolish to turn in hither, verse 16. She appeals to those who lack understanding by this. And we can just almost hear her as she whispers this. Stolen waters are sweet. And the person hearing that begins to think about that. Stolen waters are sweet. She uses deceit. She touts this as a pleasure in the forbidden, in the knowledge that you've gotten away with it. The fool listens. He envisions the thrill because of the danger and the rush as he outwits others. He's smart enough, he can take from them, he can steal from them, and he can enjoy that. And that shows his skill, that shows his superiority to them. And then we can almost see her knowing smile as she says, bread eaten in secret is pleasant. Because as one indulges himself, he fulfills his carnal desires. All the while, again, he's stealthily hiding from others what he's doing. Now again, note the contrast. Wisdom prepares a great feast. And folly says, we can steal some water. We can eat some bread in secret. You see the difference? Wisdom prepares the best that she has. But still, fools fall for the spill. They take the bait. They're snared. They don't even realize the true cost. Look at verse 18. He knoweth not that the dead are there, and that her guests are in the depths of hell. Among the many things that the fool does not know is that those who heed folly's invitation face death in the unfathomable reaches of Sheol. Ruin is just as sure and just as certain as one's heeding that call. Well, Proverbs 9 shows this personification of wisdom and folly as women. They both have houses. They both invite people to come in. They send out the invitation, but they are diametrically opposed to each other. The one who heeds wisdom's invitation and rejects folly's seductive call will find the wealth of riches beyond his imagination. Not necessarily material, but he'll find a life that is the best life anybody ever could live. And then life after that. So notice verse 5 and 6 again of Proverbs 9, the call of wisdom. Come, eat of my bread, drink of the wine which I have mingled, forsake the foolish and live, and go in the way of understanding. And so there's the call. The question is, which call will we accept? We'll choose that. Whether we accept the invitation of wisdom or we accept the invitation of folly.